Hello and welcome to another episode of Roots of Wisdom, the podcast that is all about restoring the role of the elder in modern day times. So today I'm very blessed to have an incredible elder. I initially met this elder in one of the most perhaps challenging of times. We were working together with an organization called Ibukosini, and we underwent a process called Man on the Mountain, which really reflected a lot about the ideologies of what it means to be a man. And that was the most powerful experience. And just listening to his wisdom during that time was truly transformational for me, truly transformational in many ways. And so it's a deep privilege and it's deep honor. I never introduce elders because I believe that they should speak for themselves. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to you, Ntate Mabula. Please introduce yourself and who you are and what you bring.
Thank you, my brother Lita, and greetings to the family. And I know it's host of families that will probably be listening to this. My name, it's quite a book, So I grew up, and my names are Zini, Paladin, Eric, Mkili. I grew up in Soweto. I'm born and raised there. From a very early age, I'm thrown into the depth of leadership. I'm a soccer player. There is a soccer club in our streets, in the neighborhood. In the neighborhood, I think there are three soccer clubs. And our coach, mentor also for me, takes us through training. And at some stage, there are young ones who are joining the team, the club. And this one afternoon, he says, Zini, I would like you to take care of the juniors. So that's how I come to leadership in community. But at that time, I'm not aware, that it's a leadership role. Fast forward years later, more than 30 years later, I chanced upon different individuals. But in this one instance, there were several individuals who were part of the team that was failing. And two of them, they are exuberant at seeing me, and one of them is sulky. It was an interesting contrast. Even for me, like I didn't know where this exuberance was coming from. And I thought to myself, no, they haven't seen me. I haven't seen them in a long time. That's where their excitement, comes from. And one of them said, they used to call me Mensini. So the juniors would call the older, men. So the Mensini, we also would call those who are older than us men so and so. Because we would say, Mensini, I'm so happy to see you, my God. Do you know what role you played in my life? And I'm like, what do you mean? He says, you still remember that you were our coach and trainer. And, I remember that. And now I am a qualified chemist with BSc honors in chemistry. There's it. So what is the connection between what you've achieved and me? You were such an inspiration. Your discipline, your gentleness, your firmness. And some of us, we really aspired to be like you. And I didn't know that until he shared it. And the other one said the same thing. And the second one took time. And he said to me, I'm angry with you. I couldn't, understand why he said that. I mean, of the three guys, he was the most there was connection. And we used to meet regularly long before this instant meeting or, coming together. Because it was purely by chance. And then after a while, he then breaks it down to me that, I did public admin, but I would have done much better had you stayed with us, had you stayed with me. I said, no, life is like a river. As it flows to the greater river, it breaks into tributaries, and somewhere, some of the tributaries will meet again and join and continue the flow. And I say, so this is what it is with how things have been. You had to walk your path. And I also find myself walking my path. And here again, we've been brought together. And there's no reason for you to be, sulking and regretful. Appreciate how your journey has unfolded for you and what you want to make of it going forward. Because being sulky, and it's fine to look back, but don't stay there, Instead, take lessons from there because life never stops. So that you're able to go with the flow of life until, the chronos time, comes into play.
Yes. I think for me, it's really interesting how you were walking that journey in general, and at a very, I suppose, time where you were unaware of the journey itself, of what you're doing, or what you're becoming. My question is, could you tell us rather, as the audience, what are some of the teachings that have shaped you, and perhaps some of the people that have played a critical role in your life to help you to become who you are today?
Yeah, that's a good question because, it used to be true that a village, raises the child. It raises it. So it takes a village to raise a child. And because we are, you know, I think because, there are others that I can think with, things with, and that way, one becomes their self-awareness. It's not a self-awareness in isolation of the greater awareness of others. And so it is for others as well. If you play with that, begin to realize, that being human beings are communal, social beings, not by choice, but because that's how, the creator, the maker, um, created it. So there are several people at different times, development and growth that play a part. And obviously, first place, it's the home. I'm fortunate that I was raised, up to fully ripe adult age by both parents, and had a great grandmother and a grandmother on the paternal side of the family. Some of the things that really grew me would be stories, so to speak, of lived experiences of those elders, particularly our paternal grandmother, to such an extent that I was able to make a connection between what I was reading about Africans who were taken to slavery and the conditions that our great-grandparents, grandparents, and to some extent, some of those who became our parents, that generation, that they were similar to the conditions that, our great-grandfathers and mothers who were uprooted from the continent were subjected to as slave, because they were not slaves, they were enslaved. And so that connection was quite profound because I had read Roots, Alex Haley's Roots, at the time when I would spend much of that time with our paternal grandmother. But before then, it was our father who actually who planted the seed. I mean, in the 70s, there was limited radio time, and there were those like my father who would actually tune to radio stations that were forbidden for Africans to tune to, like Radio Freedom. So I would, 8 o'clock, would put out all the lights and tune onto Radio Freedom and hear other elders who were leaders, of such magnanimity, like Julius Nyerere, Kenneth Kaunda. Think if I have, Amara Machel, we couldn't hear much because language differences. But they would come through, and then for that short time, it was not even more than 30 minutes. And then would put back the lights, and then relate African history. And I've never come across it since, throughout my 12 years of being in school. So that was quite an interesting. The other factor that played itself to my awareness of reality was the 1976 Soweto student uprising. I mean, at the time I was aware, and there were older brothers and sisters who were actually in the eye of the storm because they were in high school, and helicopters flying low above. And it was an unusual thing to experience. It was terrifying in more ways. It was really shaking what one was used to as a normal day, in Soweto. The flip side of it is that these older brothers would share what was happening, because the older generation, my father, they were somewhat like removed. And I think it was in part because of generation, but also in large part because they had to pretend that they are not involved. It was years later that I understood that my father played that kind of role that he played with us at that age, with older brothers. Older brothers, neighbors, sisters, they played a role in how one turned out. The first thing is, we are all born to a purpose, and we are all made for that purpose. And we may not know what the purpose is. So what I'm trying to say in common speak, there is genetic makeup to spirituality, without that genetic makeup, one is not really placed for the journey, of crossing the wilderness. And the wilderness comes at any age. For some people, they go through the wilderness way earlier than it would commonly be associated with going through the wilderness. More so in the time that we are living in. I mean, you can see that a lot of people are going through the wilderness. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous, it's pulling humanity in all directions. But it need not be so if we can remember, if we can be reawakened to remember it need not be so, particularly for generations into the future. And that's where I would like to say the role of elders, it will continue into the future. And this conversation, it's important precisely because those who are old now and may not necessarily be elders by role in society, in family, doesn't mean being an elder stops with that. And being a grown up stops with that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think what's important is just an understanding for me. What does it mean, really, to be an elder? And perhaps you could just share a little bit briefly about how you stepped into your elderhood. So what is the definition of an elder, and how did you step into your elderhood?
For me, being an elder, it's a role, and it's a role that attaches to responsibility, and responsibility not only to the other, but to the self in relation to the other. And what I mean by that is that sometimes some people are elders by the way they carry themselves, because they inspire, as in the case with, the lads that I used to train. At the time, for me, it was a duty, it was a responsibility, but I wasn't aware that it was a leadership responsibility until years later that others, were inspired, and they actually took paths, followed journeys that they would have not followed without that inspiration. And where did it stem from? It didn't stem from training them. It stems from the relationship we had, the relationship I had with them, right? It stems from, what resonated for them. A definition of an elder for me has to do with role and responsibility. And that role starts with self, and not self in isolation, but self in relation to others and everything that is alive. I mean, here's an example. The state of pollution, land degradation, air pollution, climate change, pollution of rivers and waters. It's a reflection on how we've become disconnected from the oneness of creation. Not only are we fragmenting amongst ourselves as human beings, and this fragmentation, it's not new, but it has peaked. But with its peak, it is also inviting us to find ways, to connect with each other, but also with each other in relation to nature, the waters, the air, the atmosphere, all of life. So for me, being an elder, particularly this time, it's hard. It's hard because there's a generational gap that need not be there. There's a singularity of thought and approach that cuts off the many streams and wealth of knowledge from experience, from history that should be feeding the contemporary generation of older people and future generations, and the future generations, the immediate young people, and those who, have newly come onto this world. I think society now, and when I'm talking about society, I'm talking about being human, being human, redefines, and I'm going to borrow that word, redefines the role of elder without negating where it draws its source and wisdom from. When you extended the invitation, I looked at my ears and I said, "There's no way," But then I look back at when I was young, my grandmother used to call me Ntate, meaning father, because they gave me the name of their father, Palad. I grow up, I'm not even aware that some of the relations I would be in would be relations that draw inspiration from. And we go through the storms of 76. Well, for my generation, we're pretty much protected, right? But for the older generation, the generation between our generation and our parents' generation, they were at the forefront, right? And then we go through the 80s, yet another storm, During the 80s, that's where there's a poignant, it's a period that is pregnant with all sorts of possibilities, including aspiration. Seeing a human being, um, you know, putting a vehicle tire on another human being, dosing it with petrol. It was the most jarring. And I'm sure that my generation, there are many of us who still deal with that trauma, but it's very different spaces of our bodies, our consciousness, how we think, how we do things. Because we've never really been open about those experiences. There's never been healing, of those experiences. So it is circumstances, it's people, it's observing, it's taking inspiration, it's reading, it's listening to elders, it's also listening to media with an eye, an ear that seeks knowledge more than information. And where information lands, it has the tenacity to tease that information for truth, for authenticity, for sincerity, not only just for validation, right? But if it is valid, how sincere it, how authentic. And for me, those virtues, they speak to the essence of being human.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I guess the next question that I have for you is, are there rites of passages into becoming an elder, or do you just grow gray hair and one day you're an elder? What is the process of becoming an elder?
The process starts, like I said, it starts from the family, from the home. Everyone is born, into a purpose. The family's role is to anchor one, knowingly or unknowingly. That's why there was storytelling. Storytelling was a way of, molding the character of a child in preparation for the different stages that can go through. Elders were observant and they played their role of observing and using what they observe to help not only grow a child, but to raise a child, to mold their character, into one that personifies, good standing with oneself, good standing in all respects of life. The current situation we find ourselves in, we find ourselves here, from layers of disruption that made it difficult for the rites of passage that were there to be carried through from one generation to the other, as was the case, prior to the disruptions. Notwithstanding that those rites of passages were not static. And unfortunately now, because of the disruptions, in large part, not only just the disruptions, we've been unable to craft rites of passage that build on the wisdom of the past in response to modern challenges and the foresight required to navigate future challenges. So we aren't preparing young people for the future that they will eventually inherit. I don't know. I don't want to use the binary good or bad, but for want of a better contrast to drive the point home, an inheritance that might not sit well with them, an inheritance that might raise more questions than we had. So, rites of passage, I like what you shared with me about what the elders and the community in Atlanta are doing, and my interaction with Ebkosini, coming to know of Elder Karenga's work. There's more that is coming from the diaspora that is shaping what Africa needs to be shaping in collaboration with them to respond to the challenges that Africa has been stagnant on, if not recessive on for the past, I don't know, 300, 400 years. I mean, let me just, underline this with the influence of Marcus Garvey, amongst others, were it not of them, there probably wouldn't have been the struggles for independence that morphed into neoliberalization and neocolonization post-independence. So there's a lot more coming from the diaspora than there is, going forth from the continent. And I'm not saying this, to say to weigh, but truth be told, there's more that has come out of the diaspora to the continent than the continent. I mean, when a person talks about my point of reference for the richness that came out of Africa politically in the struggle, I mean, Amilcar Cabral, Augustine Neto, Samora Machel, we name them, right? Atifela, yeah. But when it comes to other areas of life, they Kanta Diop, stands out. Sambena Osman on film and cinematography, and others in music, but it hasn't really aligned with the greater purpose of, progression towards self-knowledge, self-appreciation, and hence elderhood. And when you look at leadership in Africa, you have elders, a reference in just out of respect, but who have outstayed their time in the roles that they are. I mean, they should be elders and mentoring and supporting because they have now a richer experience to give foresight. I mean, the one most lamentable thing about Africa is leadership. Leadership, in government, in the public sector, even in the private sector. I'm often blown by sports persons who, when they earn more than they need, they think about, I know where I come from. I know that I have a role to play. And they build schools and they support, education programs that, there's so much more that Africans should be doing for themselves than, and drawing from the painful history. It's there. Whether we like it or not, it is there. If we don't acknowledge it, then would be failing to come to terms with how come did we land where we are? What does the future hold? How do we navigate it? So acknowledging that it is opens doors for the learn from it, to take what works and work with it, to park what may not work at the time for the right moment when to work and for the generation that it will work in, and to discard what no longer works. So when you talk about rites of passage, I'm like, I've seen much, heard much, but I don't see how it is responsive to the challenges, not only of the modern time, because the challenges of the present, they go far back. They go far back. But tradition has been stuck in time and reality. And I'm not saying there is no value in tradition. For me, there is value in the wisdom that can be win from tradition. That wisdom, it's the wisdom that shapes, a culture that will birth other traditions going forward. Which traditions will also reach their expiry date, but having shared wisdom that then is carried through the next wave of culture that will birth traditions that will become relevant for the time until they reach their expiration date. So what is happening amongst the African diaspora, it really is.
Yeah, it's good to see that, wisdom, I suppose, and the wisdom of our ancestors travels throughout time and also reinvents itself, because a lot of what you're speaking to is the ideology of reinvention. So I just wanted to ask now, do you have any advice for perhaps the younger generation, individuals that are walking this journey, but towards elderhood, but unaware, perhaps lost? What advice would you give to the younger generation around the path towards becoming an elder?
For me, it's be your best friend. And I'm saying it, as if it's a cliche, but get to know what resonates for you, what you like doing, what you take interest in, and how you connect with those that are drawn to the same interest as you, as well as working with difference. Because as human beings, we complement each other more so when we are different than when we are, thinking the same, doing the same. Yeah, the spice and fragrance of life just ceases to be. That's why. And that calls for know your rhythm, and by knowing your rhythm, know when your energy requires you to work differently with yourself, with others, and with being. And when I say being, the earth, the air, the animals, the plants, all of those, for want of a better word, elements that make life wholesome. Know your rhythm. And in knowing your rhythm, know also when you need to be silent and when you need to engage and how you engage. And all of those three threads, they bring you to knowing thyself. And knowing thyself will always be in relation to others in every respect, including, trees and bears and, because they are others in relation to what? They will teach you things. They will make you be aware of things that you probably wouldn't have been aware of because you take time to be silent, to be in rhythm, right? To know what works for you and what doesn't work for you and how to work around both spaces, what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Seek out knowledge, the substance of knowledge. It's that which grows you and can be passed on to others. Knowledge is different from acquisitions. Yes, one could perceive knowledge as an acquisition because it does come through experience. It does come from relating with others and others in the broader context, but it's not an acquisition. Once you have, you can dispense with it as if it's material. It gives essence to material, but material does not necessarily give essence to knowledge. If that were the case, the world would be a peaceful place now. We wouldn't be living in a VUCA crisis, of human relations, environmental relation, political strife, economic strife, fragmentation of social relations, fragmentation in every which way, while drawing us to a certain appreciation of being. It's equally challenging us. So when you are a growing up person who has nowhere to hold on to, seek out and create, ladders, ropes, things to hold on to. Those could be interests. Yeah, those could be interests. It could be, it's anything that adds value, to yours and others' lives.
So good. Thank you.
You're welcome, my brother.
Thank you so much. We're moving towards the wrapping up now, but I just wanted to find out, is there anything else that you personally feel is important that you share about elderhood that you might not have covered?
I think growing old, being old is not synonymous with elder. And I say this because the younger generation has a pushback on ageism. And when you lend an ear and listen to them, there is parts of truth in what they are saying. Whether it was tradition or it was oppression, it's exploitation and dispossession, children were talked to, not talked with, to the extent that you grow and children were unseen. Even precisely because the relations were such that as a child, you were not expected to ask questions. But equally, you were not told when you reach a certain age to ask, this is the age to ask questions. So that there's parts of truth to what young people share of their experiences in relation to the older generation. And those truths, they actually speak to the lack of elders and elderhood. And when you talk about elders and elderhood, I'm not being gender biased. It cuts across men, women, age. A person could grow to an age that is seen as unrelated with elderhood, and yet they are the elder precisely because of what has been conferred on them. Purpose, purpose, purpose. For young people, find your purpose. There's so much that calls and invites us to find our purpose, especially for young people. And the elders are very few. And those that are there are the most challenged, most stretched, most unseen, except by those who are seeking out what? Knowledge, wisdom, 3 branches to hold on to, rocks to hold on to.
Thank you so much. Well, it's become tradition here that at the end of every single podcast, we always ask an elder just to pray us out or share words that can inspire and ignite purpose within each and every single one of the listeners. So I invite you now to just maybe pray us out or share whatever words towards the closing that you'd like to share.
Words that come to me every so often, they are in Sesotho, Setswana, Sepedi. But loosely translated, love and light, peace and harmony. Conflicts should shape us into better beings than the worst we should not. Ashe.
Ashe. Amako. Siyathokoza. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you.